If you could only pick one skill to add to your resume, not a degree, not a certification, just one skill, here's a question worth sitting with. Which language would actually make you more money? Because languages aren't priced equally. Some languages open doors to trillion-dollar economies. Some get you a seat at the table in rooms where the biggest deals on earth get made. And some, despite having hundreds of millions of speakers, barely move the needle in your paycheck at all. Today, we're doing something we haven't done before on this channel. We're not ranking languages by how many people speak them or how fast they're growing or how far they've spread. We're ranking them by something much more direct: economic value. How much access to money, markets, trade, and opportunity does speaking this language actually buy you? And the results are going to surprise you because the language with the most native speakers on Earth isn't close to number one. And the language currently ranked as the most powerful, according to the actual index used by economists and policymakers, might not be the one you're expecting either. Welcome to the Airlearn Language Show. I'm ranking the 5 most financially valuable languages on Earth based on a mixed measurable factors: GDP access, meaning the combined economic output of all the countries where a language gives you real functional access; business and trade utility; presence in international finance and diplomacy; and the factor most personal finance advice ignores: the wage premium data actually shows for speaking that language as a second language in the job market. Before we jump in, if this list makes you want to actually add one of these languages to your own resume, the real test isn't vocabulary. It's whether you can actually hold your own in a room. That's what Airlearn's Call with Air is built for: real conversation practice, not just through tapping through flashcards. Links in the description. Let's count down. At number 5, German. And this is the one most people underestimate most. German is the largest economy in Europe and the 3rd or 4th largest economy in the world, depending on the year. And German is also the official or widely spoken language of Austria and Switzerland, 2 more of Europe's wealthiest economies per capita. That's language giving you direct access to some of the highest GDP, most industrial advanced economies on the planet, concentrated in one relatively compact linguistic zone. Here's what makes German specifically valuable rather than just a rich country's language. Germany's economy is built on advanced manufacturing, engineering, and export automotive, industrial machinery, chemicals, and precision technology. These are sectors where technical vocabulary matters, where face-to-face negotiation and contract language matter, and where a huge share of Germany's own business class, while often fluent in English, does business domestically and regionally in German first. For anyone in engineering, manufacturing, or export-facing trade, German isn't a nice-to-have. It's frequently a genuine requirement to operate inside that economy rather than around its edges. German also carries real weight in the European Union's institutional life. Germany is the EU's largest economy and among its most influential political voices, and German remains one of the 3 working languages of the European Commission, alongside English and French. The limitation is reach. German doesn't have anywhere near the global spread of English, Spanish, or Mandarin. It's concentrated in a relatively small number of countries. But per capita, and per hour of study invested, the return on German for someone in the right industry is exceptionally high. At number 4, Mandarin. And here's the surprising part: the language with more native speakers than any other on Earth, over 1 billion people, isn't higher than 4th on an economic value ranking. The case for Mandarin is obvious on its face. China is the world's 2nd largest economy by nominal GDP, and by some measures already the largest by purchasing power parity. It's the world's largest manufacturing base and one of its largest consumer markets. For any business with supply chains running through China or ambitions to sell into the Chinese consumer market, Mandarin fluency is a genuine measurable asset. Full access to negotiation, on-the-ground relationship building, and a market that operates substantially in its own language rather than English. So why 4th and not 1st or 2nd? 2 structural reasons. First, unlike English, French, or Spanish, Mandarin's economic value is heavily concentrated in essentially one country and its immediate economic sphere rather than spread across dozens of markets on multiple continents. That concentration is powerful, but it's also a ceiling. Your Mandarin fluency is extremely valuable for doing business with or in China and considerably less transferable anywhere else. Second, and more significant recently, the geopolitical and trade relationship between China and much of the Western business world has grown more complicated over the past several years, with companies increasingly hedging, diversifying supply chains, or reducing China-dependent strategies. That doesn't erase Mandarin's value. China remains a massive economy that isn't going anywhere. But it has measurably cooled what was, a decade ago, considered the single hottest language investment for global business. Mandarin remains an economic powerhouse of a language. It's just a powerhouse concentrated in one direction, at a moment when some of the easy tailwind behind it has slowed. Number 3 is French. And this is the pick that will generate the most arguments in the comments, because most people don't associate French with economic power anymore. Here's the case. French is an official language in 29 countries, spread across 4 continents, including a rapidly growing bloc of West and Central African economies, several of which are among the fastest growing populations and economies on Earth. French is also one of the official working languages of major international institutions: the United Nations, the European Union, the International Olympic Committee, and a significant share of international diplomacy and international law is conducted with French as a primary or co-primary language. The World Economic Forum's Power Language Index, a real academic ranking developed by economist Kai L. Chan, drawing on 20 measurable indicators across geography, economy, communication, and diplomacy, has consistently placed French in the top 3 or 4 language globally, largely on the strength of this combination: genuine economic weight in Europe, an expanding economic footprint across Francophone Africa, and an unusually large footprint in international governance and diplomacy relative to its native speaker count. The economic argument for French isn't about a single massive market, the way Mandarin is China. It's about breadth. A French speaker has functional economic access to Western Europe, a large and growing part of Africa, parts of the Middle East, and a real seat at the table in nearly every major international institution that sets global rules for trade, law, and diplomacy. At number 2, Spanish. And the case here is almost entirely about scale plus proximity. Spanish is the official language of 20 countries, heavily concentrated across Latin America, a region with a combined economy in the trillions of dollars and deep, consistently growing trade ties to the United States specifically. For any American business, and increasingly any business anywhere with interests in the Western Hemisphere, Spanish isn't an exotic asset. It's close to a baseline expectation in entire sectors: healthcare, real estate, retail, construction, hospitality, and increasingly corporate management, particularly in the US, where Spanish speakers make up a large and economically significant share of the domestic consumer market and labor force. The data on individual wage premiums backs this up directly. Multiple U.S. labor market studies have found that Spanish-English bilingualism carries a measurable wage premium on a wide range of professions, sometimes modest, sometimes substantial, depending on the industry and role, but consistently positive, and a particularly strong in customer-facing healthcare and management positions where direct communication with Spanish-speaking clients, patients, or teams creates clear, providable business value. Beyond the US, Spanish gives direct economic access to major Latin American economies: Mexico, Argentina, Colombia, Chile, several of which are significant trade partners with the US, Europe, and increasingly China. Spain itself adds a foothold in the European Union. What keeps Spanish at number 2 rather than 1 is that despite this enormous reach, Spanish is not the primary language of the largest global institutions of finance, law, and diplomacy the way the next one is. International contracts, global finance, and the majority of cross-border technology and scientific communication still default to the next language first, Spanish second. Number 1, and this is the least surprising entry on the list, but arguably the most extreme in scale, English. English is the primary or working language of the global financial system. It's the dominant language of international contracts, international shipping and aviation, scientific publishing, global technology, and cross-border business communication generally. When a German executive negotiates with a Japanese supplier who's selling to a Brazilian distributor, the meeting happens in English far more often than any of their 3 native languages. The economic case for English isn't really which countries speak it, the way it is for other languages on this list. It's that English functions as the default connective tissue of the entire global economy. The World Economic Forum's Power Language Index ranks English as the most powerful language in the world by a wide margin, driven specifically by its unmatched combination of economic strength, geographic reach, and knowledge and media access. Over 60% of the internet's content and the overwhelming majority of scientific publishing occur in English. And critically, for the financial value framing of this list, English carries perhaps the most well-documented individual wage premium of any second language on Earth. Multiple international labor studies across countries as different as South Korea, Turkey, and various parts of Europe and Latin America have found that English proficiency correlates meaningfully higher personal income, frequently on the range of a significant percentage wage increase compared to otherwise similar non-English speaking peers in the same local labor market. This holds true even in countries where English isn't the national language at all. The premium exists precisely because English functions as the gateway to better paying multinational and export-oriented jobs, wherever you are. No other language on this list combines a comparable global default status in institutions, an enormous first and second-hand language speaker base, and a documented direct personal wage premium across dozens of national labor markets continuously. That combination is why English isn't just first on this list. It's first by a distance that none of the other 4 are realistically closing anytime soon. So here's what this ranking actually reveals. Financial value in a language doesn't track cleanly with how many people speak it, or how fast a population is growing, or how ancient and rich its literary tradition is. It tracks with something more specific. How directly that language connects you to money, to markets, to institutions, to negotiations, to jobs that pay more, because you can operate in rooms other people can't fully enter. Mandarin has more native speakers than any language on this list and still lands fourth because its economic power, while real and massive, is concentrated in one direction. German punches dramatically above its speakers count because of exactly which economies it unlocks. French earns its spot through breadth and across continents and institutions rather than any single dominant market. Spanish earns its place through sheer proximity and integration into one of the world's largest and most Spanish-influenced economies. And English sits at the top because it isn't really competing in the same category as the other 4. It's the language everyone else uses to talk to each other. If any of these numbers changed how you think about which language might actually be worth your time, Airlearn teaches several of the languages in this list, the same contextual way, built to get you using it in a real situation, not just reciting vocabulary. Links in the description. See you in the next one.